Imagine standing inches from the most powerful and most feared man in Europe, knowing that a single mistake, one misplaced word, one delayed reaction, could mean instant death. Adolf Hitler's bodyguards lived inside that nightmare every day. They were sworn to protect a man obsessed with betrayal, haunted by assassination, and convinced that enemies surrounded him at every moment. Their story is not one of glamour or honor. It is a dark mirror of Hitler himself. Paranoia, loyalty enforced by fear, and a system where survival depended on absolute obedience. From the earliest days of the Nazi movement in the 1920s, Hitler understood that power without protection was fragile. After the failed beer hall putsch of 1923, he emerged with two permanent convictions: that he was destined to lead Germany, and that someone would always try to kill him. This fear shaped the creation of his personal security. At first, his protection was crude: party loyalists, street fighters, men whose devotion mattered more than professionalism. But as Hitler's influence grew, so did the sophistication of the shield around him. By the early 1930s, Hitler's inner circle of protection had become an elite force. The Schutzstaffel, the SS, transformed from a small guard unit into a vast organization of terror. Within it, the Führerbegleitkommando and later the Reichssicherheitsdienst were tasked with guarding Hitler personally. These men were not chosen only for physical strength or military skill. They were screened for ideological purity, unquestioning loyalty, and emotional restraint. Independent thought was dangerous. Compassion was a weakness. Doubt could be fatal. Hitler's personality dominated their lives. He was deeply suspicious, easily angered, and hypersensitive to perceived disloyalty. He changed travel plans at the last minute, demanded constant vigilance, and tested those around him with sudden questions and unpredictable behavior. His bodyguards were trained to notice everything: an open window, a strange glance, a hand moving too quickly. Yet they could never relax, because the greatest threat in Hitler's mind often came from within. As Chancellor in 1933 and Führer after 1934, Hitler survived multiple assassination attempts. Each failure tightened his grip and deepened his paranoia. After the 1939 Munich bomb plot by Georg Elser, which narrowly missed killing him, Hitler became convinced that fate itself protected him. This belief made him reckless in ideology but ruthless in security. His bodyguards paid the price. Interrogations intensified. Rules multiplied. Any lapse could end a career or a life. The relationship between Hitler and his guards was not one of mutual trust, but of domination. He kept them close yet distant, tools rather than companions. Many guards admired him at first, seduced by the myth of the Führer and the illusion of historical destiny. Over time, admiration curdled into fear. They witnessed his rages, his isolation, his growing detachment from reality as the war turned against Germany. They saw the human cost of his decisions not in abstract numbers, but in broken generals, trembling aides, and whispered orders that led to mass death. Nowhere was this more evident than during the final years of the war. As Allied bombs reduced German cities to rubble, Hitler withdrew into fortified spaces. Wolf's Lair, Berghof, and finally the bunker beneath Berlin. His bodyguards followed him underground, into a world of concrete corridors and stale air. Above them, the Reich was collapsing. Around them, loyalty was cracking. The failed July 20th, 1944 assassination attempt by Klaus von Stauffenberg marked a turning point. Hitler survived again, but the explosion shattered any remaining restraint. He unleashed waves of executions, purges, and brutal reprisals. His bodyguards became witnesses to terror from both sides, protecting a man who demanded absolute loyalty while suspecting everyone of treason. Some guards were forced to watch colleagues disappear overnight. Others were compelled to participate in arrests and interrogations. Protection blurred into complicity. In the bunker in 1945, the truth about Hitler's bodyguards reached its darkest form. These men were no longer defending a leader at the height of power. They were guarding a defeated, delusional figure, clinging to fantasies while Berlin burned. Orders made no sense. Hope was gone, yet they remained because leaving was unthinkable. Loyalty had become a prison. When Hitler took his own life on April 30th, 1945, it was his bodyguards who carried out his final commands, burning his body, destroying evidence, sealing the myth. Some later claimed they were only soldiers, only protectors. But history does not grant such innocence easily. Their proximity to power meant proximity to responsibility. They had seen the machinery of destruction from the inside and helped keep it running. The truth about Hitler's bodyguards is not simply that they were elite or feared. It is that they were trapped in the same system of ideology and terror that consumed millions. Their role reveals how dictatorship survives, not just through speeches and armies, but through ordinary men placed close to power, taught not to think, not to question, and not to look away. In the end, their story leaves us with an unsettling lesson. Evil does not always wear a dramatic face. Sometimes it stands silently at the door, guarding. History warns us that when loyalty replaces conscience and obedience replaces humanity, even protection can become a weapon. And once that line is crossed, no one, guard or guarded, truly survives. Fear was the first constant companion of Adolf Hitler long before he became the ruler of Germany. It lived with him in beer halls filled with shouting rivals, in prison cells after failed rebellion, and later in grand halls where applause thundered but danger still felt close. From the beginning, Hitler believed his life was under permanent threat, not as a possibility, but as a certainty. This belief did not fade with power, it grew stronger. And from that fear emerged a security system unlike any other in modern history. One built not merely on protection, but on ideology, suspicion, and absolute, merciless loyalty. In the chaotic aftermath of World War I, Germany was a nation fractured by humiliation and rage. Political violence was common. Assassinations were frequent. Extremists of all sides were targeted, beaten, or killed in the streets. When Hitler entered politics in Munich, he entered a world where survival often depended on who stood beside you. His earliest bodyguards were crude and brutal men, recruited from party loyalists and street fighters, valued not for discipline but for devotion. They did not protect democracy or law, they protected a man and an idea. The failed beer hall putsch in 1923 marked a psychological turning point. Hitler's attempt to seize power collapsed in chaos. Bullets flew, and several Nazis were killed. Hitler himself narrowly escaped death. Prison followed, but so did something far more lasting, the conviction that fate had spared him for a reason. From that moment on, Hitler believed two things at once: that he was chosen by destiny, and that destiny was constantly under attack. This contradiction would define his approach to personal security for the rest of his life. When Hitler rose to national prominence in the early 1930s, the fear of assassination became central to his daily existence. Unlike leaders who delegated protection and tried to forget it, Hitler obsessed over it. He read reports, questioned guards, changed schedules without warning, and demanded absolute secrecy around his movements. His bodyguards were never allowed to forget that the greatest failure imaginable was allowing harm to come to him. In his mind, their duty was not only physical protection, but the preservation of history itself, because he saw his survival as essential to Germany's destiny. This obsession reshaped the nature of his guards. Loyalty alone was no longer enough. Loyalty had to be pure, ideological, and unquestioning. This is where the SS became central. Under Heinrich Himmler, the SS transformed into an elite order bound by racial doctrine, ritual, and obedience. Within it, Hitler's personal guard units were carefully selected. Backgrounds were investigated. Political reliability was scrutinized. Any sign of doubt, independence, or emotional instability could disqualify a man. These guards were not encouraged to think. They were trained to obey instantly and completely. The system was deliberately dehumanizing. Guards lived under constant pressure, monitored by superiors, tested for reactions, and reminded that failure meant disgrace or death. Hitler believed fear was an effective tool, not only against enemies, but against those closest to him. He cultivated rivalry and distance among his protectors, so no single group or individual could grow too confident. Trust was fragmented by design. As Hitler became Chancellor in 1933 and later Führer, the scale of protection expanded dramatically. Every public appearance was choreographed with military precision. Routes were inspected, buildings sealed, crowds screened. Yet paradoxically, Hitler often defied his own security. He would appear unexpectedly, lean dangerously close to crowds, or insist on last-minute changes. To the outside world, this looked like courage. To his bodyguards, it was terror. They were forced to reconcile his recklessness with their responsibility, knowing they would be blamed for dangers he himself created. Each assassination attempt reinforced Hitler's worldview. When bombs failed or plans collapsed, he interpreted survival not as luck, but as proof of destiny. This belief made him increasingly intolerant of perceived weakness. After the failed Munich bombing of 1939, which missed killing him by minutes, security tightened to extreme levels. Guards were interrogated, new layers of control were added, no one was fully trusted. Hitler began to see betrayal everywhere, especially within Germany itself. This paranoia had consequences beyond personal safety. It influenced political decisions, military command, and internal repression. Hitler's belief that enemies lurked in every shadow justified purges, surveillance, and terror. His bodyguards became both instruments and victims of this system. They enforced strict security measures while living under them. They watched colleagues disappear after minor infractions. They learned to suppress emotion because sympathy could be interpreted as doubt. As the war turned against Germany, Hitler's fear intensified rather than diminished. Defeat did not humble him, it isolated him. He withdrew from public life and retreated into fortified headquarters. The further he sank into isolation, the more dependent he became on his guards, and the more he suspected them. Security checks became rituals of control. Doors were locked, corridors were guarded. The world outside shrank to maps, reports, and the silent presence of armed men. The failed assassination attempt of July 20th, 1944, shattered whatever remained of Hitler's psychological stability. Though he survived yet again, the explosion destroyed his belief that loyalty could be assumed. From that day forward, his obsession reached its most extreme form. Thousands were arrested. Executions followed. Even within his protective units, fear replaced routine. Guards were no longer simply protectors, they were potential suspects. In the final months of the war, Hitler's security system achieved its ultimate, tragic expression. In the Berlin bunker, protection became meaningless. There was nothing left to defend except an idea and a dying man's will. His bodyguards remained, armed and watchful, not because they believed victory was possible, but because the system they served allowed no exit. Loyalty had become a sentence. The obsession that shaped Hitler's bodyguards did not save him, and it did not save Germany. Instead, it helped sustain a regime that thrived on fear, crushed conscience, and rewarded obedience over humanity. These guards stood at the threshold of power, believing they were protecting history, while in truth, they were guarding its destruction. Their story forces an uncomfortable reflection. Tyranny does not survive through one man alone. It survives through systems built to protect power at any cost, and through individuals trained to obey without question. Hitler's fear of assassination created more than a security force. It created a culture where loyalty replaced morality, and protection became complicity. And when fear becomes the foundation of power, It consumes everyone who stands close enough to feel its shadow. They were chosen not merely to stand between Adolf Hitler and a bullet, but to stand between him and reality itself. Hitler's bodyguards were not selected as ordinary soldiers or professional security men. They were filtered, tested, and shaped to fit an ideological mold. Physical strength mattered, discipline mattered, but neither was enough. What Hitler demanded above all was psychological obedience and political purity. Men who would not hesitate, not question, and not think beyond the moment they were commanded to act. From the earliest days of Nazi consolidation, Hitler understood something dangerous and deeply human, that weapons alone do not protect power. People do, and people are unpredictable unless they are reshaped. This belief guided the construction of his personal guard. The men closest to him were not meant to be individuals with judgment. They were meant to be extensions of his will. Their loyalty was not simply expected, it was engineered. The foundation of this system lay in the SS, an organization that presented itself as elite, disciplined, and honorable, while quietly becoming one of the most ruthless instruments of terror in modern history. Within the SS, those assigned to Hitler's personal protection were subjected to scrutiny that went far beyond normal military vetting. Their family backgrounds were examined for political reliability. Their beliefs were measured against Nazi ideology. Their emotional temperament was observed closely. Independence, empathy, or intellectual curiosity were liabilities, not strengths. Hitler feared assassins, but he feared betrayal even more. History had taught him that enemies did not always come from outside. The collapse of empires, the downfall of leaders, often began with those closest to them. This lesson, whether learned or imagined, shaped his worldview. As a result, his bodyguards were expected to demonstrate not just loyalty, but a kind of ideological emptiness, a willingness to erase personal judgment and replace it with obedience. Training reinforced this mindset. Guards were taught to react instantly, without reflection. Orders were to be followed even if they made no sense. Questioning a command was interpreted not as caution, but as disloyalty. Over time, this conditioning created men who acted first and thought later, if at all. In Hitler's presence, silence was often safer than speech. The fewer opinions a guard expressed, the longer he survived. Political purity was enforced relentlessly. Guards were expected to embody Nazi ideals in appearance, behavior, and belief. They were not merely protecting the Führer, they were symbols of the regime's supposed strength and unity. Any deviation, political doubt, moral hesitation, private criticism could result in removal, investigation, or worse. The system was designed to eliminate not only threats, but conscience. Psychological obedience was cultivated through fear as much as ideology. Guards knew they were being watched by superiors, by internal security, and sometimes by Hitler himself. Mistakes were remembered. Failures were not forgiven. Even rumors could destroy a career. This constant pressure created a climate in which self-preservation depended on absolute conformity. Loyalty was no longer a moral choice, it was a survival strategy. Yet this obedience came at a cost. Many guards entered service believing they were protecting Germany, serving history, and standing close to greatness. Over time, reality intruded. They witnessed Hitler's volatile moods, his growing isolation, and his detachment from the suffering caused by his decisions. They saw aides humiliated, generals dismissed, and entire populations condemned. But their conditioning left them powerless to respond. To speak was to risk everything. To remain silent was to become complicit. As the war progressed, ideological purity became even more important to Hitler than competence. He trusted belief over expertise, devotion over realism. Guards who displayed enthusiasm for Nazi doctrine favored over those who quietly understood the war was being lost. This preference reinforced the echo chamber around him. where bad news was softened, doubts were hidden, and reality was filtered through fear. The irony is that this system, designed to protect Hitler, ultimately isolated him. By surrounding himself with men trained not to question, he eliminated the possibility of honest warning or internal correction. His guards became a human wall, not just against assassins but against truth. Information was delayed, altered, or suppressed. Decisions were carried out without challenge, even when they led to catastrophe. After the failed assassination attempt of July 20, 1944, Hitler's obsession with loyalty reached a fever pitch. Survival confirmed his belief that enemies were everywhere. In response, political purity became absolute. Suspicion replaced routine. Guards were interrogated, reassigned, or executed based on association alone. Loyalty was no longer enough. It had to be proven constantly, publicly, and without hesitation. In the final months inside the Berlin bunker, the meaning of psychological obedience became brutally clear. The guards were no longer protecting a functioning state or a rational leader. They were protecting a collapsing illusion. Hitler issued orders to imaginary armies. He spoke of victory while surrounded by ruins. The guards obeyed, stood watch, followed procedure, because they had been trained to do nothing else. Some later claimed they were victims of the system. In many ways, this is true. They were shaped by ideology, trapped by fear, and stripped of moral agency. But history cannot ignore their role. Psychological obedience does not absolve responsibility. It explains how responsibility is abandoned. Political purity does not justify silence. It reveals how silence is enforced. The selection of Hitler's bodyguards shows how tyranny protects itself, not only through violence, but through control of the human mind. By choosing men who would obey without thinking and believe without questioning, Hitler created a shield that was terrifyingly effective and profoundly destructive. It kept him alive long enough to unleash unimaginable suffering, and it ensured that when collapse came, there would be no one close enough, brave enough, or free enough to stop it. This is the deeper warning hidden within their story. When loyalty is valued more than conscience, when purity replaces humanity, and when obedience becomes a virtue, power no longer needs chains. It builds its prison inside the mind. And those who stand closest to it, guarding its doors, may never realize they are locked inside until the walls finally fall. Every attempt on Adolf Hitler's life did more than threaten his body. It reshaped his mind, hardened his rule, and spread fear through the very heart of the Nazi state. What began as a leader's concern for personal safety slowly transformed into an obsession that poisoned trust, intensified repression, and turned Germany into a nation ruled not only by ideology, but by terror from within. Each failed assassination deepened Hitler's paranoia and tightened the grip of fear around everyone who stood near him. From the earliest years of his rise, Hitler believed that death followed him closely. Political assassinations were common in post-World War I Germany, and extremist leaders often met violent ends. Hitler watched these events carefully. He convinced himself that survival was never guaranteed and that enemies were everywhere: communists, Jews, rival nationalists, even former allies. This belief never left him. Instead, it grew stronger with every close call. When Hitler survived the failed beer hall putsch in 1923, he did not interpret it as a warning. He interpreted it as confirmation. Fate, he believed, had intervened. This sense of destiny became central to his identity. But destiny, in his mind, was always under siege. That contradiction, feeling chosen yet constantly threatened, created a psychological tension that would define his leadership style. He did not merely rule, he guarded himself against betrayal in all its imagined forms. As Hitler moved from fringe agitator to national leader, assassination attempts became more serious and more organized. Rumors, plots, and intelligence reports flowed constantly. Some threats were real, others exaggerated or invented. To Hitler, the distinction mattered little. Every threat reinforced his belief that survival required total vigilance. Security measures multiplied, but so did suspicion. Protection no longer focused only on external enemies, it turned inward. The most important consequence of repeated assassination attempts was the collapse of trust. Hitler came to believe that danger did not come only from outsiders, but from within his own system. Political rivals, military officers, even long-serving loyalists became potential traitors in his eyes. This fear reshaped the Nazi state into a structure where obedience was enforced through terror and uncertainty. No one could feel safe, because safety itself bred suspicion. Each failed attempt made Hitler more ruthless. Instead of questioning why opposition to him existed, he assumed it was proof that enemies were too weak, too cowardly, or too disorganized, and therefore needed to be crushed more completely. Repression intensified, surveillance expanded, arrests increased. The Gestapo and SS were empowered further, given broader authority to investigate, detain, and eliminate perceived threats. Fear became policy. The bombing attempt at Munich in November 1939 marked a turning point. Hitler left the beer hall minutes before an explosion killed several people. Once again, survival reinforced his belief in destiny. But this time, the reaction was darker. Hitler became convinced that even ordinary Germans could be enemies. The idea that a lone individual could come so close to killing him shattered any remaining sense of public trust. From that moment on, loyalty was no longer assumed. It had to be constantly proven. Inside Hitler's inner circle, the atmosphere changed noticeably. Conversations became guarded. Informal exchanges disappeared. People measured their words carefully, aware that a single sentence could be misinterpreted. Hitler encouraged this climate, deliberately or instinctively. He allowed fear to spread because fear maintained control. When people are afraid, they obey. When they obey, power feels secure. The bodyguards and aides closest to him felt this pressure most intensely. After each assassination attempt, security reviews turned into interrogations. Guards were questioned not only about procedures, but about thoughts, associations, and attitudes. Innocent mistakes were reinterpreted as potential sabotage. Careers ended overnight. Some individuals vanished without explanation. Terror became invisible but omnipresent. This internal fear reached its peak after July 20th, 1944. The bomb placed by Klaus von Stauffenberg exploded close enough to injure Hitler, yet failed to kill him. This was not an outsider's attack. It came from within the German military itself. For Hitler, this confirmed his deepest fear, that betrayal lived at the core of his own system. The psychological impact was devastating. After July 20th, Hitler's paranoia hardened into obsession. Thousands were arrested. Many were tortured and executed. Trials were staged as spectacles of humiliation. Even those marginally connected to the plot were condemned. Loyalty was no longer about belief, it was about survival. Fear raided every level of government and military command. Hitler no longer trusted expertise or realism. He trusted only devotion. Officers who spoke honestly about the deteriorating military situation were dismissed or ignored. Those who echoed Hitler's fantasies were promoted. This distortion of reality had catastrophic consequences. Military decisions were made to satisfy Hitler's need for control rather than strategic necessity. Germany bled while fear silenced truth. Within Hitler's personal security units, terror became routine. Guards understood that protecting Hitler from physical harm was no longer enough. They were expected to protect him from doubt, contradiction, and reality itself. Silence became a shield. Agreement became armor. The closer one stood to Hitler, the less human one could afford to be. As Allied forces closed in and Germany collapsed, assassination attempts ceased to matter. Hitler was now protected not by strength, but by isolation. In the bunker beneath Berlin, fear reached its final form. Hitler trusted almost no one. He lived surrounded by armed men, concrete walls, and delusions. Above ground, the world was ending. Below ground, paranoia reigned. The tragedy of repeated assassination attempts is not simply that they failed. It is that each failure strengthened a system of internal terror that destroyed any remaining chance for resistance, reform, or mercy. By surviving, Hitler became more dangerous. His belief in destiny excused brutality. His fear justified repression. His paranoia silenced truth. In the end, assassination attempts did not remove Hitler from power. Instead, they transformed his rule into something even darker. Fear no longer flowed only from the top down. It circulated everywhere, infecting institutions, relationships, and decisions. Germany became a nation trapped inside the mind of a man who trusted nothing but fork, and fate. This is the final, bitter lesson. When attempts to end tyranny fail, they can sometimes strengthen it, especially when the tyrant interprets survival as divine approval. Paranoia then becomes policy, fear becomes loyalty, and terror becomes normal. History reminds us that when power is ruled by fear of death, it often responds by spreading death everywhere else. By 1945, Adolf Hitler was no longer the commanding figure who had once electrified crowds and bent an entire nation to his will. What remained was a collapsing myth, sustained by ritual fear and the silent obedience of the men who still stood guard outside his doors. His bodyguards, trained to protect power at its height, now found themselves defending an illusion, one that demanded loyalty even as reality disintegrated around it. As Allied armies closed in from every direction, Hitler retreated further from the world he had helped destroy. Public appearances vanished. Grand speeches ended. The Führer, who once thrived on mass adoration, withdrew into fortified headquarters and finally into the underground bunker beneath Berlin. Each step downward mirrored the collapse of his authority. Yet the security apparatus followed him faithfully, maintaining procedures designed for a leader who no longer truly existed. Inside these sealed spaces, protection lost its original meaning. There were no longer crowds to control, routes to secure, or public threats to neutralize. The danger was no longer an assassin's bullet. The danger was reality itself. Hitler's bodyguards were now tasked with guarding not a man engaged with the world, but a leader who rejected it entirely. The routines continued because routines were all they had. Guards stood at attention, passes were checked, doors were secured, orders were followed precisely. But these acts no longer served a practical purpose. They served a symbolic on. They preserved the appearance of authority in a place where authority had become hollow. Every salute, every checkpoint, every posted guard reinforced the illusion that command still flowed from the center. Hitler's mental state deteriorated rapidly during this period. He spoke of armies that no longer existed, victories that could not happen, and betrayals that explained defeat without confronting reality. His bodyguards witnessed this transformation firsthand. They saw maps marked with imaginary movements. They heard commands issued to units that had been destroyed. Yet they reacted as they had been trained to react, with silence and compliance. Protection, at this stage, meant shielding Hitler from contradiction. Guards and aides learned quickly that correcting him was dangerous. To challenge his beliefs was to risk removal, accusation, or worse. Truth became a threat. The closer one stood to Hitler, the more dangerous honesty became. His bodyguards, once meant to protect his life, now protected his delusions by maintaining an environment where no opposing voice could reach him. The bunker itself became a psychological prison. Thick concrete walls blocked sound, light, and perspective. Inside, time blurred. Outside, Berlin burned. The guards heard distant explosions and felt the ground shake. Yet inside the Führer's rooms, meetings continued as if history could be held back by discipline alone. The contrast was unbearable, but discipline left no room for protest. Loyalty in this final phase had nothing to do with belief in victory. Most of those present understood that the war was lost. Loyalty had become mechanical, stripped of hope or meaning. It persisted because the system allowed no alternative. Years of ideological conditioning had trained these men to equate obedience with survival. Leaving was unthinkable. Disobedience was treason. And treason, even meant death. The bodyguards were trapped in a paradox. They knew the myth was collapsing, yet their presence helped sustain it. Hitler's authority endured within the bunker precisely because it was isolated from the outside world. Guards enforced that isolation. They controlled access, filtered information, and ensured that the Führer's environment remained insulated from despair. In doing so, they prolonged the final act of a regime that had already fallen. As supplies dwindled and morale evaporated, Hitler's commands grew more detached. He demanded loyalty, not as a means to achieve victory, but as an end in itself. Obedience became proof of faith. The guards, standing watch in narrow corridors, embodied that obedience. They represented the last remaining structure of the Nazi state: order without purpose, discipline without direction. When Hitler finally accepted that defeat was inevitable, it was not because reality had reached him gradually. It arrived suddenly, violently, and too late. Even then, his concern was not for Germany, but for control over his own ending. His bodyguards were summoned one last time, not to defend the future, but to manage the past. They received orders to destroy documents, to burn bodies, to erase evidence. Protection had transformed into erasure. In carrying out these final commands, the guards completed their transition from protectors of a leader to caretakers of a myth. Their actions were no longer about safety, but about legacy, preserving the image Hitler wished to leave behind. Even in death, the illusion had to be maintained. The body had to disappear. The symbol had to be controlled. After the bunker fell silent, many of these men would later describe themselves as powerless, trapped by duty and fear. In some sense, this was true. They were products of a system that punished thought and rewarded obedience. But their story also reveals something more disturbing. Power does not vanish when it collapses. It lingers in habits, in rituals, and in people trained to serve it even after its purpose is gone. By 1945, Hitler no longer commanded the world. He barely commanded reality. Yet his bodyguards remained, standing watch over a man whose authority survived only because no one was willing or able to say that it was over. They guarded empty power with real weapons, defended fantasy with real lives, and maintained order in the service of destruction. This is the final truth hidden in those underground corridors. A dictatorship does not end when it begins to lose. It ends when belief in it finally dies. In Hitler's bunker, belief was already gone, but obedience remained. And as long as obedience remained, the myth endured. History offers a chilling warning here. When systems train people to protect power rather than truth, those people may continue their duty long after power has lost meaning. They may guard ruins, defend lies, and enforce silence while the world collapses above them. In the end, Hitler's bodyguards did not protect a leader. They protected the last fragile shell of an idea that had already destroyed everything it touched. Their story does not end in the bunker, nor does its meaning belong only to the past. The true significance of Hitler's bodyguards lies not in uniforms, weapons, or secret corridors, but in what their lives reveal about the dangerous transformation that occurs when human beings stand too close to absolute power. Step by step, proximity eroded moral boundaries until obedience replaced conscience, duty replaced judgment, and silence replaced humanity. Most of the men who became Hitler's bodyguards did not begin their lives as monsters. They were shaped by a wounded nation, raised in an atmosphere of humiliation after World War I, and drawn toward promises of order, pride, and belonging. Service close to Hitler appeared to offer honor, purpose, and security. Few could have imagined how completely that closeness would consume their moral freedom. Power has a gravity of its own. The nearer one stands to it, the harder it becomes to escape its pull. For Hitler's guards, proximity meant privilege, better living conditions, status, and protection from the chaos engulfing Germany. But privilege carried a price. With every step closer to the Führer, the space for independent thought narrowed. The expectation was not merely to obey orders, but to internalize them, to anticipate them, and eventually to defend them without being asked. At first, the moral compromises were small, ignoring an insult, remaining silent during an unjust order, accepting harsh security measures as necessary. Each act seemed temporary, justified by circumstance. But moral erosion rarely announces itself. It progresses quietly, normalized through repetition. What once felt uncomfortable gradually became routine. The guards witnessed events that should have triggered resistance, arbitrary punishments, humiliations, and the quiet removal of those who fell from favor. They heard conversations that revealed contempt for human life. They saw decisions that condemned millions. Yet proximity distorted perspective. These acts occurred behind closed doors, wrapped in authority and urgency. When violence is hidden within bureaucracy and ritual, it becomes easier to accept. Fear played a crucial role. The system ensured that those closest to power were also closest to danger. A single misstep could end a career or a life. Surveillance was constant, trust was rare. In such an environment, conscience becomes a liability. Speaking out risks everything. Remaining silent feels safer. Over time, survival instincts overpower moral instincts. Proximity also creates identification. Standing beside a powerful figure daily blurs emotional boundaries. Guards learned Hitler's habits, moods, and vulnerabilities. Some developed a sense of personal loyalty, mistaking familiarity for understanding. This identification made moral separation harder. Criticizing Hitler felt, to some, like betraying someone they knew personally, even as that person ordered mass destruction. As the war progressed, the moral cost of proximity increased. Guards were no longer merely witnesses, they became facilitators. They enforced isolation, filtered information, and helped sustain an environment where reality could not reach Hitler. By controlling access, they controlled truth. By maintaining silence, they enabled catastrophe. None of these actions required direct violence, yet their cumulative effect was devastating. This is how moral boundaries collapse, not through dramatic choices, but through everyday compliance. Each small act of obedience prepares the ground for the next, larger one. Each moment of silence trains the conscience to stay quiet. Eventually, the line between right and wrong fades, replaced by a simpler rule: obey or perish. The tragedy is that many guards likely recognized at some level what was happening, but recognition alone does not stop moral collapse when systems are designed to punish dissent and reward conformity. Over time, the guards became trapped not just physically, but psychologically. Their identity was bound to their role. To reject the system would mean rejecting themselves. After the war, many claimed they were merely following orders, merely doing their duty. History has heard this defense before. It is not entirely false, but it is incomplete. Following orders explains behavior, it does not absolve it. Proximity to power offers comfort in exchange for responsibility. Accepting that exchange is itself a choice, even when made under pressure. The deeper lesson is unsettling because it is universal. Moral collapse does not require cruelty at the beginning. It requires distance. From victims, from consequences, from truth. Power creates that distance. Those closest to it may feel insulated, protected, even superior, but that insulation numbs empathy and weakens resistance. Hitler's bodyguards demonstrate how ordinary individuals can become guardians of extraordinary evil without ever seeing themselves as villains. They did not design the ideology, they did not write the laws, but they stood close enough to protect the man who did. Their silence, obedience, and presence mattered. Power does not operate alone. It relies on people willing to stand nearby and look away. This is why their story remains relevant. History is not only shaped by leaders, but by those who choose proximity over principle. When systems reward loyalty more than truth, proximity becomes dangerous. It tempts individuals to trade moral clarity for safety, belonging, and status. The collapse of moral boundaries rarely feels dramatic from the inside. It feels gradual, justified, and necessary. Only later, when power falls and distance returns, does the full weight of complicity become visible. By then, the damage is done. In the final days of the Third Reich, Hitler's bodyguards stood watch over ruins. Their weapons were real, their authority was intact. But what they guarded was empty. Power without legitimacy, obedience without purpose, order without morality. The closeness that once felt meaningful had led them to the edge of history's darkest abyss. Their story leaves us with a warning that transcends time and place. When individuals stand too close to unchecked power, moral boundaries blur, conscience weakens, responsibility shifts upward, and evil no longer requires belief. It survives on obedience alone. History asks not only who ruled, but who stood beside the ruler. It reminds us that the greatest danger is not always hatred but silence, not always cruelty but compliance. The lesson is clear and uncomfortable. Power corrupts most deeply not those who command it, but those who guard it without question. And when moral boundaries finally disappear, the distance between protector and perpetrator vanishes with them.